Greetings, traveler. Today we're talking about how to be a dungeon master in a Dungeons & Dragons tabletop role-playing game. This is the second video in the series about what Dungeons & Dragons is and how you could learn more about it in a simple way. And if you would like to know why this is relevant to game designers, then I'll link the episode of Easy Mode where I talk about exactly that topic. So if you don't know who I am, my name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for the last 13 years or so, and this podcast is my way of sharing everything I've learned. So if you're someone who's walking the path of making video games, this one is for you. So in the last video, we talked about what D&D is in a broad way, and there we picked up on two things. First, it's a way for the dungeon master, the organizer, let's say, and conductor of the game to share the world and the story and the objective of the game with the players. And second, once that is shared and once the players start participating in the story, they make their own characters, they select their weapons and abilities and so on. And then they start their adventure into this world set by the dungeon master. But how exactly does someone become a dungeon master? What are the skills you need? What are the things you need to know? And so on. Let's talk about that. Last time we said that the best way to get introduced into a Dungeons & Dragons game is join an existing group. And by joining that group, you can learn all the information you need to play with that particular group. So in that group, they will most likely reference a book similar to this one. So something Dungeon Master's Guide. In Dungeons & Dragons, the conductor of the game is called Dungeon Master. In other systems, they might be called Game Masters or some other similar name. So if a game needs a conductor to set the story and not participate in the game as a player, but rather as a conductor and coordinator, then usually they're called Game Masters or Dungeon Masters or something like that. So let's have a look inside in this book and see what, according to the designers of the game, is the necessary ingredients for becoming a Dungeon Master. So in the beginning of the game, there is a lot of information about how to create a world or what a world is in a general sense. So is it a fantasy world? Is it a dark horror world? And so on. It talks about that information and about the setting of the game in a very broad way. Then it continues with how to create your own setting if you want to create something custom. Although that's a bit more advanced, it's still part of here. And then the book continues with information about how to run the game and how to conduct it. Now, there is a lot of information here, a lot of tips and tricks and good practices for how to present the world and the story to your players in an engaging way so that they feel compelled to explore more, interact with your world more, talk to the NPCs you set for them and achieve the goal that you have set before them, or at the same time achieve individual sub-goals and side goals that the players have set for themselves. So the game continues with giving descriptions for all sorts of magical items and treasures and so on that the players can find in the game, and these serve as rewards for the players doing well, being explorers, being challengers, going out on adventures, and so on. The game has a level up system, so the higher you level up, the shinier toys you get to play with, and so on. So this is a general introduction about what being a dungeon master is. It's essentially a conductor of the game. Now, in the scope of game design, it is very interesting to see how this book or similar books from other editions or perhaps other systems altogether tackle the task of introducing a setting to a player and having a way to invite other people into that world. That is very common with designing video games, and there's a ton of things to get exposed to and to learn from that. So let's say you have access to that book, or you borrowed it from a friend, or you found a resource online and you learned some basic things. It can be overwhelming, so I would say don't worry about it too much. Instead, see the things that are interesting to you, so in a sense of storytelling or perhaps a cool adventure idea that you saw somewhere, and try to focus on one thing at a time. I think that's the most fun way to explore this realm. And when the time comes for you to try to run your own session as a dungeon master and not as a player anymore, then my recommendation would be to pick up one of the published adventures that exist on the topic. So the company that makes D&D, Wizards of the Coast, they have lots of products published in that sense. Some of them are published online by third parties, some of them are completely free resources. Anything you can find and you have access to that seems understandable and well organized is good enough for a place to start, I think. So your next step would be to read that published adventure, try to understand the content, the reason why players should care about this, how players would be involved in it, how they would be introduced into that particular setting, and what they are expected to achieve in that adventure. Typically, every such book will offer a few hooks for the players to be introduced into the story. So it will say something like, for example, if it's a story about a village that's been plagued by a curse and nobody knows how to solve it, then perhaps the players are inhabitants of that village initially. They are local hunters or militia people or scholars that are also affected by the curse, or their loved ones are affected by the curse. So they have intrinsic interest in lifting that curse. Or perhaps they're travelers that are just passing through and they wish to help the village for a reward. Alternatively, they could be hunting for something entirely different. Perhaps they're hunting an evil wizard, and this village has nothing to do with their quest. But as they stay the night in the village and they learn more about the situation, then they find out that the curse that's affecting the village has a very familiar theme about it, knowing about the evil wizard that they are currently in pursuit of. So perhaps it's a clue to help them in their own personal quest to achieve their own goals, and the party's goals and the village's goals are at this point in time aligned, and that's a good enough incentive for the players to jump into that. This is just an example. Most published adventures will have similar hooks for the players, so look out for those and you'll be able to use them. And then you will see in those published adventures that there's also information about the locations inside this adventure, so the village, the dungeon that perhaps the evil wizard is hiding in, the monsters that the players are likely to encounter in their exploration, in their adventure, the treasures they're supposed to find, maps and grids and stats and information that describes the world that they're being exposed to in this adventure. And finally, it has information about the conclusion of the adventure, what happens if the players succeed, what happens if they fail, what happens if they only manage to save, let's say, some of the villagers from the curse and not all of them. So there's a lot of leeway here, and as every good published adventure I think will mention, they will say that the information in that particular book is basically a guideline. If your party or if what you want to achieve is slightly or greatly different than what that adventure mentions, you have all the liberty to do so. But until you get to that point, or until you're feeling comfortable going in and going under the hood and getting your fingernails dirty with changing all the rules and the monsters and the items in the adventure, you can start with what's being offered and see how you want to customize it later on. So that is a simple way to transition from being just a player, a participant in a Dungeons and Dragons game, to being a dungeon master, somebody who decides the story, the setting, communicates with the players to put the story together, and then conducts the game from the beginning of the adventure until its resolution. And that can take several sessions, by the way. It's entirely up to your group. So this covers how to become a dungeon master in Dungeons and Dragons. In the next episode, we will talk about how you can then use this as a vehicle to create your own custom adventures and even your own custom games. So I think Dungeons and Dragons is an excellent framework to make you make that leap in the future. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for your time today. And as always, have fun.